My name is Yoshua Pfeffer, and welcome to Headlines to Yeshiva Shalmaila. I'm filling in today for Rav David Lichtenstein, who's away this week, and today we're going to have the privilege to discuss and to delve into an area of the Torah and Halacha, which is central to all of our lives, and this is the area, the matter of ishus, of intimacy between husband and wife. Now, as a disclaimer, as a refrain, I'll say at the outset that although we'll be dealing with the topic in a theistic way, in a way that's appropriate for the sensitivity of the issue, still the broadcast is intended for married people alone, and not for bachrim, not for unmarried women. The question of what young and unmarried adults should or shouldn't be exposed to is one of the issues that we'll be touching on later, but the decision is up to parents, up to rabbonim, educators, and without that parental guidance or rabbinic approval, this specific issue of headlines is meant for married individuals or for chas and kala who are about to be married, and not for bachrim or for unmarried women. So today we'll be speaking to a number of distinguished rabbonim and professionals in the field of marriage counseling, in the field of intimacy. We'll be speaking to Rabbi Simcha Feuerman about the challenges facing couples today and the relevant approach in Halacha and Ashkafa. We'll be speaking to Rabbi Gideon Weinstein on similar aspects. We'll be speaking to Rabbi Friedman on the Torah outlook to marriage in general, to intimacy in particular. All three are experienced authors and counselors, and we'll give more details of biographies later when we get to the interviews. Now, just by way of a short introduction, of course there are many Ma'amari Chazal that speak about intimacy, speak about ishus, and from many different perspectives. But I wanted to just introduce one Maimah Chazal in the Gemara Menachos, Daf Mem Daled Amud Aleph, which is, I think, an amazing and a very profound introduction to Chazal's approach to ishus, to intimacy, which presents a starkly different picture, a starkly different approach to the matter of ishus than some non-Jewish approaches, which we're aware of because we've lived for a long time in Galus among non-Jews. Even today, secular culture is all around us, which is an important reason for why this is so crucial to discuss and to open up. But Chazal, in this Gemara at least, have a very clear approach, and I think a very important insight towards the relationship, towards the approach to Isha. So the Gemara speaks about Adam Echad. The Gemara speaks about somebody who was a Talmud, we'll see, of Reb Chia, and he was Zahir b'mitzvahs tzitzis. He was very particular, very careful about mitzvahs tzitzis. But on the other hand, he was also someone that wasn't able to restrain himself from Averos and Shama sheyesh zoina b'krache hayam. He heard about a zoina in krache hayam sheneteles taled mir zehuvim, great expense, very exclusive, and he decided he needs to go there in order to perform the Avera. And he actually did. He went there and he was about to do the Avera with this Zoina when the Gemara says, Bo Dalit Tzitziyosov, the merit, the schus of mitzvahs tzitzis, held him up, and his 4 Tzitziyosov, top chule al panov, they struck him across the face. And this caused him to rethink and to recalibrate, and he was chayzer b'tshuva. And the Gemara says that also this Zoina decided that she wants to be miskaya, that she wants to convert. And she asked him, please write me down your name, your address, the Beis Medrash where you learn. And then she went to Beis Midrash Shel Reb Chia. She went to Reb Chia, and Amaloi, Savei Alai V'yasuni Giyoris. I want to become a Giyoris, I want to convert. So Amala Biti, my daughter, Shema Einayich, not as the Echad Min HaTalmidim. Perhaps you want to get married dafka to one of the Talmidim. So she took out the ksav that she gave, that this Talmud had given her. You should go and get married. And the Gemara concludes, and this is the amazing line. The Gemara says, that very same linen, those very same bed sheets, that had previously served her be'isr in a matter of an Avera, now hitzia loy beheter. Meaning we see here an incredible and profound statement that the Gemara says that the idea in Yiddishkeit, the approach of Chazal towards intimacy, is that the same thing that can be done, the Isser, with its vulgarity and with its loneliness, that same thing can also be done with elevation, with Kedusha, with Heter. I remember that the Yavitz in Moruk Tzia, in Siman Reish Mem, the Yavitz speaks about Ishus, about the Kedusha of Ishus. And the Yavitz says, Ein Arich Elov, B'chol Maisa Basav Adam. There's no more elevated, there's no greater Maisa in all of human interaction, in all of human action. But he says specifically, K'shayufal b'chavana tahira u'machshava zako nekiya, meaning the Torah wants us to elevate, not like some elements of Christian theology where the whole Maisa is considered something negative, something dirty, something which is, the ideal is to abstain completely and to live a life of abstinence without ishus, without intimacy. On the contrary, the Torah wants us to have the intimacy, but wants us to have it on a level of Kedusha, on a level of Taira, on a level of human elevation that brings us to the highest level, and then we reach this level that the Yavitz says, Ein Arei Chelov. We know also from the Ramban, also from the Rebbe, from other Sfarim that deal with it. And we know it from Sefer Bereshis that tells us that Yazevish is Oviv, and a person cleaves to his wife, Hayu lebasa echad. And as the Torah says, that basa echad is not just a mitzvah of pruvu. Of course, it's a mitzvah of pruvu on the one hand, but it's also the shlemis, it's also the completion of Adam himself. It's also the way in which we become complete people through union with our spouses. And specifically today, in an age where we're so exposed, whether we want it, and of course, in general, we don't want it, to secular culture, to the secular understanding of intimacy, of the concept of how the relationship is understood in the outside world. Those ideas, they pervade, they filter in, they affect the way we think. And that's why it's so important today to present the Jewish version, to present the Jewish understanding of intimacy, the elevation, the way that we understand it's supposed to be. And I've seen in several places how this is really such a central and important issue for so many people within the Frum community. One place I saw this, I was a Rav many years, a rabbi many years, on the Din Online website. Din Online is a website that provides halachic responses to questions from around the world in Hebrew, in English, in Russian, in other languages, and sometimes tens, if not hundreds, of questions and answers every day. And when I was one of the chief halachic moderators of the site, I found that an unusually high proportion of questions relate specifically to areas of intimacy. And this is really putting a finger on the pulse of the frum world. You see what people care about. You see what people are affected by and which questions are important for them. And a lot of these questions, whether from Avreichim and Koilerim or from Balabatim or even from people who were less frum, but still wanted to know, and it was significant, it was important for them to know what's also, what's mutter, what's possible under certain circumstances. This was, one of the major topics that people submitted questions about. And another place where I've seen the centrality of this is from close friends and colleagues that are involved in chassan training, in marriage counseling, psychoanalysts, psychotherapists, and from many conversations I've had with them, I learned that often strained and troubled relationships, whether early down the line, or whether early on in the marriage or further on down the line, are often related to issues of intimacy. And the tensions in those relationships often stemmed from misguided attitudes towards intimacy that poskim and rabbanim today would surely not endorse. And those attitudes, combined with the exposure to secular culture that somehow pervades and makes its way inwards, create a real tension and real difficulties, real troubles. And it's really sad because these could have been avoided by a healthier and more open discussion with a chassan kala or early on in the marriage with good direction and good counsel. Now that could have really solved a lot of these difficulties even before they came up. And I know that some have an approach which is perhaps different. I once saw a contrast. I don't know if it's still around today, but I once saw a contrast that was supposed to give guidance to Kala teachers, and this contrast advised Kala teachers, counselors, not to speak as little as possible about Kedusha. The contrast said the more you speak about Kedusha, the less Kedusha there actually is. Just speak about being tzniustik in all times and in all situations, and don't mention as little as possible. I remember it said that don't mention psukim from Shira Shirim about Ava, and don't speak, and so on and so forth. And maybe once upon a time that was a positive and could be the foundation of healthy relationship and healthy intimacy. Today, where the outside world is so promiscuous and so permissive, and its messages filter through, and we all hear them from whichever channel and whichever outlet, and even without any outlets, they come in and they're just there in the air. So I think, and this is certainly what I received from my Rabbanim, including from Rav and from others, that it's a great mitzvah to speak and to prepare and to provide the Yiddish alternative, the Jewish alternative, the way that we look and perceive the elevation of intimacy, of the relation between husband and wife. So we'll get to this in a minute. Just before we begin with our interviews, we're going to have this week's riddle. We know that there's a machlekes of poskim in the question of being mevatel isur lechatchila. If you take an isur, it's forbidden, it's also to take a shtik isur and be mevatel it b'shishim. I put a piece of nevela in shishim of heter, and then the nevela is bottled in the shishim of nevela. There's a machlekes whether that's midoraisa or midorabanan. It's mentioned in the Nodi Yehuda, for example, Yerodea Tinyana, Simon Memhei. It brings two tzadim. It could be that the isur to be mevatel isur lechatchila is only dorabanan, so rabbinic. It could be it's a doraisa. Now, on the tzad, that we say that the isur to be mevatel isur lechatchila is dorabanan, meaning the doraisa it's mutter to be mevatel isur lechatchila. So why does the Torah tell us to take the nevela and to give it to a ger, or to sell it to a goy? There's a better option. You can use the nevela for yourself. All you need to do is to find shishim of heter, be mevatel, whichever isur you have in shishim of heter, and then you can eat it yourself, because midoraisa it's mutter to be mevatel isur lechatchila. So that's the second question. First question, what's the connection between the Reish and the Sefer? Second question, why, according to the Mandama, mutter levatel isur lechatchila, why does the Torah tell us dafka to give it to a ger and to a goy? With that, we're going to move on to our first interview on the subject of intimacy, relation between husband and wife. And the first interview is going to be with Rabbi Simcha Feuerman. Rabbi Simcha Feuerman is both a rabbi and a psychoanalyst with many years, 25 years of experience in marriage counseling and therapy. He's the author of a book on the subject, which is called Marriage 911, 3-Step Method to Reviving Troubled Relationships. It's a book which he wrote in a few years ago. And he is also the president of the Nefesh organization that brings together from psychoanalysts and psychotherapists. And he also, and perhaps this is where most people have seen him, he is also the Maggid Shir of a long series of shiurim, which are provocatively called the Chazan Shmuz you wish you had, but never got. They're available online on the Guard Your Eyes website that deal with addiction and other issues related to intimacy. And those, I'm sure, have brought a lot of Torah to the public. And I'm sure Mir Hashem will have a lot of Torah from this interview. So Rabbi Friedman, thank you very much for being with us today. So it's an honor to have you. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask maybe a kind of open-ended question. And this relates to perhaps the current condition, the current situation of relationships, of marriages in general, and of the issue of intimacy in particular. Because, as I mentioned at the introduction, it seems to me that a lot of marriage counselors, a lot of marriage therapists are treating couples especially from couples from the yeshivish or from the frum world in general, that are having difficulties, that are having tensions, specifically in the area of intimacy. And my question is, what is so special, what is so different about today rather than, 30, 20, 40 years back, that today people are experiencing these very, I would say, special, idiosyncratic, specialized issues related to this field that were not so much around before, and that seem to be a real issue today, which, often this can even lead, chas v'shalom, to divorce, and certainly to a need for kind of rethinking and recalibrating the relationship. So could you please tell us from your experience, knowledge, research, how you would approach and explain this often troubling question?
Well, there's so much to say on this issue. I'll start, but you might have to interrupt me because I may go on for a long time. But let's talk.
Okay.
You'll agree to do that. But let's just
Sure.
start with it's impossible to talk about people in general without talking about context. There's almost nothing that people understand or do or feel that isn't influenced by the context that we live in. I mean, we have a very well-known understanding from Chazal in the Nishtanu Atibim, and those ideas in Nishtanu Atibim, those are referring to biological realities, which biological realities you would think are pretty hard to change, and yet I don't think anybody could deny that German Jews, Yekas, look German, Russian Jews look Russian, Sephardic Jews look Sephardic, American Jews look American. So we're talking about however that happens, and I'm not here to discuss right now, biological or scientific realities, but we know it's true. So we can see it with our own two eyes. So if biological realities change based on culture, climate, and experiences, Kal v'chomer, ben benoshel kal v'chomer, that psychological realities, which are far more mutable because attitudes and beliefs, I'm not talking about, beliefs in the emunah sense, I'm talking about beliefs like what we expect out of the world, what we're taught to expect from our families, from our parents, from our culture. Those things are even more mutable. Those change even more quickly. So if we're living in a culture which there's no question that in the last at least half a century, if not more, there's been much more promiscuity and much more focus on sexuality, that will have an influence on us. And as a therapist, one of the important things to understand, which I think is very different from a traditional outlook, is that there's no such thing as something that's bad. There's only, opportunity, which is that there's something, if our lives are changing, those changes have an implication. And of course, if those changes are not taken advantage of in a positive way, they certainly could lead to negative things. But, right? There are many things you can't control. The basic structures of our lives, whether they're going to fly to the moon or Mars, or whether we're going to have global warming or not, or any of those things we really can't change. Those are big picture issues. But what we can change is our attitude towards the things that are happening. And that's what I think it means when it says, so we live in a culture where there's a tremendous amount of emphasis on physical appearance, on sexuality, on sensuality. Forget about sexuality. Sensuality, meaning, there's a tremendous amount of focus on pleasure. You only need to walk in the street. You could be the most sheltered person in the world. You walk in the street, a bus stop, an advertisement for chocolate is practically pornographic. And I'm not even speaking explicitly. Even if it was just a picture of the chocolate itself looks pornographic. It's luscious, it's sensual. We live in a world that's very, very different from that of people 50 or 100 years ago. And because of that, we need to understand both the challenges and the opportunities, presented before us.
Right. So I think that's a very very good. I think it's a very good starting point, because what you're saying is, let's not be necessarily judgmental about this. Let's first of all accept this as the reality that we live with. We live in these times, and if we think that we can somehow isolate ourselves, somehow cut ourselves off from this reality, then we're really killing ourselves. Meaning this is defining the way we understand relationships, even if we don't buy in to the secular culture, Khalila, and we're not, of course, we obviously need to protect our communities to retain a level of kedusha and to retain our separation from promiscuity and from sin, Khalila. But still, the way we understand relationship and marriage and intimacy will be defined to a large degree by those ideas that are coming in from general culture.
Exactly, and that there is a lot of, again, you can find a chazal to support and also to refute and be soiser any idea. I think the point is to understand that each idea, each pisgum that you're going to find has an appropriate place. So, as much as you're going to find teachings that are extremely ascetic, which, some Kodesh you would say that speak of precious, you're going to find, the opposite. So, for example, the Gemara in Sota, on Daf Mem Zayin, right? Yetzer Tinuk Ve'isha, Tehei Smol Docher V'min Karevis. The idea that there are some things that you don't attack in a frontal assault, that you don't take on by fighting with both guns blazing, so to speak, that you have to have a more subtle approach. So if a person wants to deal with the Yetzer Hara, at least in some respects, and again, quite obviously there's chazal that say different ideas too, but this particular chazal is expressing the idea that if you want to deal with your Yetzer Hara, sometimes the frontal assault, total abstention, ruling out every type of sense or desire, will not, in the end, serve your needs. And I think that one dimension of this is to understand if you're in a promiscuous culture, I think that the important thing is within the right perspective and the right balance to know how to work with that, to work with it productively, and that I think that's what it's driving at. So yes, we live in a culture where we have a lot more freedoms and a lot more opportunities, which offer many, many benefits. I do think that the benefits are fantastic, and that if we sit around and bemoan the fact that we live in this culture, we're missing the point. And the Eibishter has blessed us with wonderful, wonderful opportunities, and to enjoy the world in and of itself with the right balance, again, the right perspective, is no crime. It's a karas hatov. Enjoy the world and make brachas and enjoy it, but obviously also needs to be in balance. But to sit around and wring our hands about how awful the world is just silly. I don't think our ancestors, if they could have had a chance to enjoy the benefits of the world that we enjoy, I don't think they would have sat around and wrung their hands and bemoaned the state of the world. I think they would have had a lot of hakaras hatov for all the wonderful things that they could have.
Right. It's interesting to reflect about the question of how this works in a halachic sense, because somebody who would be learning Shulchan Aruch, let's say, there are differences between Orach Chaim Rish Mem and between Even Ezra Chaf Beis. Of course, it's not quite the same, but somebody just basing himself on those sources would be leading a life that you would probably say would be quite harmful or quite problematic from a relationship perspective.
But there's already a huge mistake. But that's already a huge mistake, because Shulchan Aruch never, Maran the Beis Yosef and the Ramah, they never expected in a million years that a layman would open up the Shulchan Aruch and decide how to live their lives. That was completely alien to their thinking. A person would speak to a Rav or their Rebbe or a Rebbe for that matter, which didn't exist in the time of the Rambam, but the concept, everything is, there's nothing really new, and get hadracha. Torah Baal Peh is always Baal Peh. It's delusional to think that one could understand how in the pratim of one's life, we're not talking about the broad scope of things, but the pratim of life, that you can get accurate guidance from a book. It was never, ever meant to be. And even after the Torah Baal Peh became Torah Shebiksav, it was only meant as Rashi Pratim, as chapter headings. If I may, again, I told you you're going to have to interrupt me, because once I start, it's very hard to stop.
No, you should go ahead. This is very important, so please carry on. This is good.
These things are very, they have so much meaning to them that it's hard, just Lamana Emes not to get passionate about it. But, I tell people, when you look at a psak, wherever it may be, it doesn't matter, because once you're already looking at it, it became no longer Torah Baal Peh. It now became some version of Torah Shebiksav. But when you look at a psak, the best metaphor to understand this is like taking a picture of somebody running. Now, when you take a picture of somebody running, you are looking at a moment in time, a visual representation of a process that's far more complex than what you see. It's true, you can imagine what it was like before and after the picture, but all you're simply seeing is one moment in time. Anybody who thinks that by looking at a psak that they are experiencing Torah Baal Peh is, once again, I say, delusional. What you are seeing is a moment in time. You are seeing what a particular Das Torah said in response to an issue at that moment in time. It doesn't make it invalid, but it is not particularly valid to the prat of the individual. The only thing that's valid to the individual is what a Rav and Meir Hara will tell him or her at the time that he tells him or her, period. And that's not to say that a properly trained Rav and Meir Hara will not consult with all the poskim beforehand. Of course, that's an integral part of Torah, is understanding, precedent and halacha and all that. But the fact of the matter is that what a Rav will tell somebody privately and personally is very different what they will publish. Many times I personally experienced, because I have the privilege and the opportunity both of having having some great people who taught me, and also just because of the work that I'm doing to, in the end, consult with poskim. And I can tell you, without doing any particular name dropping, but I can tell you that there are times where what I was told was so different from what the same posik wrote in their sefer. And I said things, even though I already know the answer, but I would say, but in your sefer, you didn't write that. And then they would look at me like, what, are you crazy? Of course I didn't write that in my sefer. What are you talking about? It's just, this is how it works. And even though that's so alien, that is a modern conception, because we're so used to the ideas of like freedom of the press, freedom of information. In the United States, probably not in Eretz Yisrael, although everything goes on over there to copy America on a governmental basis, so it might be true too. In the United States, there's something called the Freedom of Information Act. You could request any government document, as long as it hasn't been specifically ruled as classified, for state security reasons. You could request any government document. The judge that's ruling over you on parking ticket, you could request a document looking at their performance evaluation.
Right.
Well,
today, it's not so simple to have private conversations today, because whatever you say is often being recorded, whether you know it or not. And then a lot of these Torah Baal Peh kind of psakim that used to be given one-on-one, this is just for you, somehow make their way online or to different places. So, even this method of transferring halacha is becoming kind of threatened because of the modern environment where everything's being recorded.
Right. As people say, Rabbi Google. But again, the famous Chavetz Chaim mashal about the invention and the industrial, revolution. Kol Ma'asecha B'Sefer Nechtavim. This tells you that the proliferation of information and knowledge is in and of itself a tremendous opportunity, again, as long as people understand that. But there is this damage. Chaim Soloveitchik's famous essay about rupture and I think rupture and transformation, or rupture and reconstruction. Yes, fascinating essay. He makes an extremely valid and relevant point that our generation rules from what's written in the book, because we don't trust. Instead of it being what he calls mimetic.
He speaks about the mimetic tradition that's faded, and that the book tradition has become much more. But I totally get it. Let me try to recap what you would say specifically on the issue that we're discussing. What you would say, and tell me if I'm representing this correctly. What you would say is that if we read Chazal generally and let's say Shulchan Aruch specifically, so we'll see there basic concepts, basic ideas that Chazal and that Halacha wish us to be informed by, animated by, understand. Meaning, on the one hand, there's an idea of restraint, on a certain idea of restraint, Kamisha K'fay Shade, or an idea of priesthood which is there. On the other hand, there's an idea of a mitzvah, of a mitzvah, and on the other hand, there's an idea of a certain hana'ah, whether that's as an obligation to a person's spouse, to a person's wife, or as a human need. And the balance between those ideas, however, is not something that we can freeze for all eternity. The balance between those ideas, and even the way that those ideas are expressed, is something which will be, by definition, dynamic.
Yes. Well, let me very specifically even address Kafar Shade, because as far as I understand now, I can't tell you that this is unanimous, but it is still a known piece of Torah Shabbat, at least by the Litvisher, which is that Kafar Shade that was discussed in Shulchan Aruch is completely impossible. It's simply not, the doctrine of Kafar Shade is simply not something that, it's one thing, you want to go to a certain madrega, and there are definitely many, many worthwhile madregas in terms of sneus and precious, even in Tashmish, the Shulchan Aruch talks about what's done in the right place and the right time can be extremely valuable. But Kafar Shade in particular, that doctrine is not necessarily attainable. And I'll tell you something else too.
And again, this is known from the Stipler and from others. I think it's, yes, like you say, in the Litvish, this is known in the name of the Stipler.
Right, and in the Brachas Samach Beis and Medalus, the famous Gemara where Rav Kahana stayed underneath Rab's bed, but people may not know there's a Rav Yaakov Emden over there on the on the daf in the Hagos. Rav Yaakov Emden, he says, from here you see that Kafar Shade is not even a madrega that Rav was holding by.
So perhaps it's just worth mentioning, having brought up the Maimah Chazal of Megala Tefach or Mechatza Tefach, the Doime Kamisha K'fay Shade. This is in the Darim Daf Chaf Amud Beis. So we know that there's a number of Perushim to this Maimah Chazal. The Rishonim Shidim Kubeta is bringing Peshein the Re'im, one Perush. That the idea is to diminish, to minimize the Hana. This is a Perush brought also by the Raibad in Bali Nefesh in Sharak Dusha. Brings another Perush that it means to be over with the Maisa as quickly as possible. While other Rishonim, the Ritva, the Meiri in the Darim, say that the Perush is to minimize the histaklus, minimize the ability to see his wife, that the Tefach is not speaking about the man, but rather about his wife. The Shulchan Aruch actually concludes that all the Perushim Kulahu, the lashon of the Shulchan Aruch is the Kulahu, Perushi Isnehu, B'tzarech Baal Nefesh, Yizai Bahem, that a Baal Nefesh, somebody on a high madrega, obviously this isn't a strict halacha l'maisa, but somebody on the madrega of adhering to these principles should do so. On the other hand, it's interesting to find in the Ramban, this is perhaps a bit less well known, but the Ramban in his, again, it's Meyuchas l'Ramban, the Igeres HaKodesh, which is Meyuchas l'Ramban, in Perek Vav, he brings a different pshat altogether in the idea of Kamishik Shade, and he says, that he didn't intend to have Hanas Tashmish, but rather his intention in the Maisa was for Mitzvahs Oina, was for the pleasure of his wife, and not for his own pleasure and for his own Hana. So that's a different approach to the whole Maisa, that it's not about what he actually derived, but rather about his intention. Also important to note that in other places, in Shulchan Aruch, we find Dafka the importance of the Hana and of the Taiva in the union itself. In Shulchan Aruch Erechaim, for example, in Hilchos Shabbos, in Reish Pei, we find the Tashmish Hamita Mita'anuge Shabbasu. Meaning that because of the Hana, because of the Oineg of the Maisa, then it's specific to Shabbos, which is a time where Oineg is positive and desirable, and highlighting, of course, the element of the Tainug and the pleasure of the Maisa. And in Even Ezer, in Simcha Hey, Seif Beis, we find that Binyane Tashmish Shulchan Aruch Paskins Yochel Saper Ima Kedei Laharbes Tavasa, in order that there should be specifically more taiva in the Maisa, which is considered positive for the union itself. We find this in Sefer Chassidim, in Siman Shin Samach Beis. Sefer Chassidim says that there was somebody who advised a Chassid Echad that he should only be Mahara B'Yirah Shamayim during the time, and Oisei Chassid answered that on the contrary, that being Mahara too much in Yirah Shamayim and in Torah will be Mevatel, will lessen, diminish, or be Mevatel completely the Taiva, and that would be problematic. The Yeres HaKodesh, of course, says that this is a T'nai, a condition for Hashrash HaShchina, that there should be a Taiva in the union, that it should be something which is done in a way which has a desire and a pleasure. And interesting to note, Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, just to conclude on this matter, Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen speaks about, this is in Tzidkas HaTzadik, in Ois Kuf Mem Vav. So he speaks about the Oisei Chassid that the Gemara mentions in the Dorim, and it says there that he had children that were exceptionally beautiful. And Rabbi Tzadok says that this fits Rabbi Eliezer, that we also find that his children were very beautiful. And he says that Rabbi Eliezer, his midah, his attribute was the midah of Yira, as opposed to Rabbi Yehoshua, the Bab Plukta, also in Tanura Shalachnai in Baba Metzia, that Rabbi Yeshua's midah was a midah of Ava, by contrast with Rabbi Eliezer. And that's why we find that Rabbi Yehoshua it argues against Minhagi Precious in Baba Basra, in the Samach Hamad Beis. And Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen says that the halacha on this is like Rabbi Yehoshua, as in all places. Rabbi Eliezer is a Shemuti, like the Gemara says in Baba Metzia, and the halacha is like Rabbi Yehoshua. And he says that's why the Gemara says it in a lashon of Doma Kimisha Kafei Shade, which is a remez, it's a hint, an allusion, that this is not the proper conduct, which is like being a shade.
Now, granted, Rabbi Yaakov Emden was somewhat iconic.
He was a very original writer in this field, also. Yeah.
Exactly. However, that's an important point to make. That's an extremely valuable point. So again, but the thing is, when it comes to tznius, you see, what people need to understand, and I think this is the piece of Torah Sheba'al Peh that we can talk about, openly, and I think everybody can understand it. That tznius and precious, it's about the concept. In other words, if you're talking about it, there's a difference between a value and a halacha, right? So you want to look at the halacha, go to Even Ezer. As you mentioned, there's a very big disparity between Orach Chaim and Even Ezer, right?
Even Ezer brings the Rambam, but it's the Rambam which is much more,
exactly. And even that Rambam, there's different Gersos. People can look up, if you want to look up, even in that Rambam, there's some more radical Gersos and less radical Gersos. But the issue here is, again, you want to look at the halacha, you can go to Even Ezer. you want to look at what's orach chaim, so to speak, the way, or in Yiddish, the weg, the way a person should go, you can look at orach chaim. But the point is that
sorry, let me just come in just for a second. Do you mean to say orach chaim is the weg? Is it the way people should go also today? Meaning this is the ideal, you would say, even for today, or perhaps today, even as an ideal, the Even Ezer, or some different level of compromise between them. Like, what would you say about that?
I think that's where a person needs a Moreh Derech. I think that on the one hand, lo kol arotza yitol Hashem yitol, and on the other hand, people also have to challenge themselves. But that is not something that. And
also perhaps it's different communities. Different communities, in a Hasidic world or in certain Hasidiyos, and in different communities have different norms and different she'ifos in this field.
Correct, but I will tell you this: having worked with the majority, really, Baruch Hashem, it's really a privilege. It's an opportunity. Having worked with almost every community over the years, I've been doing this for 25 years. So I've worked with different Hasidus and different areas of the Shia community. I have not seen a dayan or a Moreh Hara that didn't radically change the approach towards tznius when it came to shalom bayis issue. Once it became a serious shalom bayis issue, the flexibility is astounding, and that doesn't.
But then the question is, why should we be waiting for it to become a shalom bayis issue?
I agree, but again, we're dealing with a kind of East meets West attitude. In other words, the old school attitude, because remember, in the old school, either you were a Talmud Chacham or you had a Rav who told you what to do. So in the old school, the thought was, don't worry, if people needed help, they'd go ask for help. I think, obviously, today we're living in a generation where there are different reasons for this disconnect. And I must say, even though this is a sidebar, I think it's an important sidebar because you can't ignore sociology in this discussion. I think that because one of the major breaches in trust was over the whole way that sexual abuse was handled and mishandled by the more traditional community. It took decades for the reality of sexual abuse and the reality of predators and the reality of victims to become assimilated into the halacha consciousness. I think that we have a generation of people who are extremely mistrustful of Rabbanim, and I am not here to praise such behavior, but I think that also we wouldn't be acknowledging reality if we didn't know that there was some truth to that. If you go through a generation where, aside from the fact that there have been numerous terrible, incidents of public sexual scandals involving people who should have known better, then you also have, thousands of victims, and they become a part of the consciousness. And so I think that the level of trust is very different today.
That's a kind of crisis of authority, specifically in this area.
Correct. Mm-hmm. If you're reading in the paper, and it doesn't really matter, I'm not here to put down any particular group of people. I'm just simply talking about the reality. If every 5 years there's some kind of scandal where a prominent Rav, and you'll say, you'll use circular reason and say, obviously he really wasn't the Yirei Shamayim Talmid Chacham. Fine, I got all that. But if every 5 years, even if it was only every 5 years, some prominent Rav, a community leader, there's a sexual scandal or a financial scandal, and their name is in the paper, what do our children learn? We just can't ignore that. It doesn't mean we should celebrate it, but I'm saying we can't ignore that. So the point is that I think that today's generation are, a little bit less trusting, and so they will go to textual sources. They will go to.
Right, but what you're saying, though, is a kind of
friends
the catch-22. This is like a catch-22 situation, because on the one hand, they're less trusting, but on the other hand, they're also more needy. Because if once upon a time people would say, he'll get married and everything will be okay, today he'll get married and nothing will be okay.
Yeah. I mean, listen, there's a lot of truth to that. But the point that I'm trying to make is I think there's a difference between a halacha and a value. A halacha is relatively immutable. I mean, even over time, certain halachas go through certain kinds of responses to the external realities, but those are much more subtle and slow-moving. But values, in other words, like we were saying, a derech, something that's musari, something that's based on what's considered proper, those can go through a lot. So, you want to look at the halacha, you have Ibn Ezra. You want to know what the ultimate value is, you have Orach Chaim. What a person individually should do, as the saying, as it goes in English, the viewers should not attempt this at home. Meaning, you have to have a hadracha from somebody. For every person, there's different. The concept is that a person should definitely challenge themselves to be outside HaYoseh Tov, to be porish to some degree, because we need to understand that we're in this world not only for our own gratification, and that if our focus is only on gratification, we'll be miserable. This is a Torah truth. This is a psychological truth. It's an absolute, that we cannot exist and really be happy if we exist only for our own gratification. Therefore, the Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and His great wisdom is offering us tools in which to have the right attitude. However, what precious means in each climate and location and time might be very different. But why precious today? Halavai person should be shomer einayim. Halavai person should be able to express love and loyalty to their spouse. This would be already a big achievement. But
that itself, though, again, everything affects. All fields are mutually in certain relationships, because the fact that today it's so much harder to be shomer einayim, that itself also affects the level or the if you want the nature of the intimate relationship with a person's spouse, meaning the need for it, or obviously it's much more important to preserve the integrity of the relationship than to work on your precious. If that's going to endanger or to threaten the fidelity and the integrity, then you should put the precious away for other areas or for a more narrow range of opportunities.
Right. There's always opportunities for Mesiras Nefesh. You don't have to go looking for Mesiras Nefesh. You will find it wherever you turn if you're interested. It is, it obviously is a very, very complex, Indian, because you basically, and again, I think the best way to understand these ideas is that in Torah there's constant polarity and tension between two different things. In other words, it's never about an absolute. It's about the tension between two. So you have the idea of, right, Eva Katan Yesh Ba'adam, Mazbiya Roy, and then you have Moshe Lamar Davadomer, Adam Konen Vashok. The answer is that we're challenged to try to live healthily and harmoniously in some healthy kind of tension, and this is what goes on. I think that, but people really do need hadracha and proper hadracha, because it is difficult on one's own. There's so much, it's hard to find your own space when it comes to things like this. It's very hard to think clearly, to be machmer, to be mekel. You have chumra dasi leid kula, and you have kula dasi leid kula, which is obvious. It takes a lot of thought, for sure.
Absolutely. Maybe if I can ask you again, the same topic, but from another angle, and the question would be, people think about, or let's say that halacha is very much directed at the man, the male partner in the partnership or in the spousal relationship, and the question would be, I don't know how things were once, but today for a person to say, well, now I'm working on precious. It seems to me that today the expectation in a marriage would be that avodah itself will be an avodah that involves both partners. Perhaps halacha would express this as an obligation. You have your chiyuv of mitzvahs oina, But, today we would speak about this perhaps less in terms of obligation and more in terms of doing this together, as it were. The Aveda itself somehow would have to include the other spouse, the other half of the relationship, and somehow be done together. Perhaps that would make it more complicated, but perhaps also more harmonious. I don't know, how would you think about that in your experience?
Yeah, so that's actually a very valuable point, because first of all, I think that today that the experience in a relationship is husband and wife are much more they're working together, and again that's an opportunity and a challenge, but they're working together, and so like the concept, there's a saying in English, all boats rise with the tide. It's impossible for someone to decide that they want to be parish unilaterally and do it on the cheshbon of their spouse or their children. I'm reminded of the famous Kutzkervart, which is worry about your friends' gashmius and your ruchnius. Unfortunately, a lot of times it goes the other way around, and
the famous letter of the Steipler about. I'm sure you've seen this famous letter of the Steipler about this.
Sure.
That that the chiyuv today, even for Talmidei Chachamim, a certain number of a certain frequency, and even chas v'shalom to be peiresh. He speaks very much about the obligation. The Issa D'Oraisa he speaks about, or Sofik D'Oraisa. But like you say, today the language we would put this in different terms, as it were.
As it were, and that there are also, which is interesting. Again, Chazal are a tremendous storehouse and oitzer nechmad of wisdom. And even though, again, you need to be a Moreh Hara to understand how to apply specifically all of the ideas. But this is well known that already mentioned in Yevamis on Das Samach Beis, the Tosfos over there talks about that oina is not only the act itself, but it's every type of kind of kurva. And Shulchan Aruch and Yerodei and Kuf Pei Daled and Piskei Tshuvos and Chaf Beis, it talks about that chibuk and nishuk, all these things are a kiyum of oina. So like people have to have a little seichel that in today's times, Ona is, the kiyum of Ona is a very broad topic. It's not limited to a moment, b'shas mitzvah. It's a concept. It's helping that the woman should feel beloved, the wife should feel beloved and feel endeared and valuable and special, and that many of the difficulties that people have in the bedroom come from attitudes and behaviors that are out of the bedroom. And the truism everybody would recognize.
Which really reflect the relationship in general. Yeah. It's not, you can't separate the intimacy from the whole package of the relationship. And that as it were, overflows into the whole space of the relationship.
Right. And because a self-concept is very different today, so people's sense of individuality and self-concept is very different, it would take a different level of recognition, a different level of coverage, even though, again, you could find Chazal, all those things, but they become so much more important in different contexts. And a woman's self-concept today is very different, and if she does not feel like she's chashuv in the eyes of her husband, it's just like, again, there's so many Merkaz if you want to apply them. The fact that, if a woman doesn't have smichas das in the marriage, if the ksuba is not there, which of course today the ksuba is much more of a paper tiger, but the idea is there, that if a woman doesn't feel a smichas das in the marriage, the B is a
commitment. It's a question of commitment, a question of...
So if a person cannot create, in the relationship, this feeling that the woman feels, that the wife feels that she is important and special and unique, and that the commitment is unique, then their sense of wish to be mizdabek, their wish to be connected to their spouse is going to be more limited. And in general,
and the point that I'm hearing though from you is that that was true always. Chazal said it, and it's always been true. But the way in which a woman will feel that commitment today is not necessarily the same as it was 40 years ago or 20 years ago, meaning one has to be aware of what it takes.
Right? Hillel, for Ani, he hired a servant, to walk in front of him, and one day he couldn't find a servant to walk in front of the person. He did it himself. You see that the idea of covet is subjective. In other words, what a person feels, how a person feels respected is subjective. Now today, the famous Ravia by Hilchos Pesach that
today.
So can you imagine that was then? You can imagine what it is now. Right. You have to understand, to give a woman a sense of covet would be very different, and it's a tremendous tactical error to downplay that, to be machmer in something else and not be machmer. This is a huge mistake. It's very interesting. Chazal always look at the underdog. So, like this famous Rashi in Mishpatim, when it talks about Yosem and Almana, that you have to be very careful with the Yosem and Almana and Noah by Yosem and Almana. Rashi over there says that Dibir Chacham and Behove. It doesn't really mean a Yosem and Almana alone. It's the Yosem Almana because those are the prototypical victims. Imagine a few hundred years ago, how could a woman on her own earn a living? How could an orphan earn a living? So they'd be most victimized. So today, who's the underdog? A lot of people are underdogs today, whether it's a person part of a minority group because of their socioeconomic status or because of the color of their skin. Who's a minority group today? Or a gender. Somebody who's. The point is that the Chazal are very careful.
Shedimosan Mitzuyah, the Gemara says in Subbas about a person's wife.
Notice they say Shedimosan Mitzuyah. A lot of people would say, well, she cries a lot. Obviously, she's faking. Notice how Chazal's world is Olam Hafach. If she cries a lot, it means you have to be more sensitive to her. Wake up. So it's very interesting. Right? That they don't say, oh, Shedimosan Mitzuyah, so therefore it must be she's not so important. No. True, Das Torah, whatever says it's an insanity. It's the other way around. So people do need to understand that the context is very important, and what's covered is very important, and that don't be making on such a thing, because a lot of shalom bias issues come from the woman not feeling valued and loved, because it's a bilas nus. It's pashut. That's what it is. If there's no sense of that I'm important to my husband and I am unique and special to him, it'll feel like a bilas nus. And for a woman, if it feels like a bilas nus, they're not interested. Men have a very different approach to this, as we may know as men. But for a woman, if it's a bilas nus, nothing doing. The electricity doesn't even start. No connection. It's over with.
Right, perhaps that's some say this is a reflection of the right, absolutely. But this is perhaps a reflection. Some say this is a reflection of the more spiritual nature of the woman that feels the relationship element. Is the relationship there, or is it something which is alongside or outside of doesn't reflect the depth and profundity of the relationship, which if it's not there, then it's really not the point. First thing, this has been really illuminating. Feuerman, I'm sorry, Rabbi Fireman, this has been very illuminating. And thank you very, very much. I just want to direct listeners, if they want to hear more, then I assume the right place is the Guard Your Eyes. All the shiurim are there. And, I'm sure what we've spoken is only a small...
I do have a sefer as well. It's available online, or also because it was sponsors. Anybody who's a Klei Kodesh can get the sefer for free, which is easy enough to reach me. You just Google me, you'll find my address.
Okay.
Around.
What's the sefer called?
It's called Eis Lifrosh ve'Eis Le'ahov, and it's written Lashon Kodesh, and it's done. It really addresses many of these issues. Baruch Hashem, again, I've had a lot of opportunity to be able to share these words of Torah with people. Many Chasam Madrichim and others have used this sefer, and that the value is that if I tried to write all that in English, it would probably fill up 500 pages. But the lesson of Chazal is Pekitzer and Samzach, and so it's much easier to express certain ideas in Lashon Kodesh. So there's no English version of that. Marriage 911 is a different book. It has many good ideas in it. It's a completely different book. It's
not for the Talmid Chacham, that's for the lay person more. But it's important to say, I like the way that you said these divrei Torah, because these are divrei Torah. Some people think this is counseling and it's good advice, but these are divrei Torah mamash. This is an integral, a central part of Torah is relating to relationships, and the way Chazal and the Torah relate to it, and the way that we relate to it. These are Gufei Torah mamash. Anyway,
I would say the barometer of whether a person is successful or not in Torah and Yiras Shamayim is the quality of his relationship with his wife and his children. And if he's wanting in that area, then Yehush is putting a mirror in front of his face. You got to do something about that. As Rav kind of said,
the relationships that we have with people are a microcosm of our relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu also. So,
absolutely. Okay, thank you. This was a wonderful
Thank you very, very much again. It was really illuminating, and I'm sure it'll be a big toilet for many people. Yishakar, thank you very much.
That's welcome. Take care.
So joining us today to speak about this both very delicate, sensitive, but also very important topic is Rabbi Gideon Weitzman. Rabbi Weitzman is one of the Rabbanim at the Puah Institute, which is an institute that does fantastic work with couples that need fertility treatment and other issues related to fertility health. He's also a marriage counselor, which is also part of the services that the Puah Institute provides. And for our purposes, he's also somebody that's widely consulted with and advises on issues of intimacy and marriage among some couples. So Rabbi Weitzman, thank you very, very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show again.
Thank you very much. So maybe just by way of introduction, perhaps I'll just ask a general question. I'll be very happy to hear about your experience and what you've learned from that experience concerning this basic issue. And that is the question of really how to bridge the kind of expectations that people come into a marriage with in the realm of intimacy, which are often informed and influenced by general culture, which pervades, at least to some degree, from society, even yeshiva society to a degree, and how to bridge between that and the concepts of kedusha, the concepts of halacha, the kind of issues that I found come up often and often raise certain friction, certain tension within marriages. How would you open up? How would you give us a kind of overview of that idea of that dealing with those issues from experience and from your learning?
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much for raising this topic and for inviting me to share some of my ideas and some of my experiences, you said. I think it's very, very essential, and as you said so correctly, that it is a very thorny and delicate issue because we are so influenced by our surroundings and by often non-Jewish perceptions of intimacy and marriage and the expectations of marriage. A little bit of history. If we go back 100 or so years, and even if we go back to the Gemara, people were basically taught about intimacy and about marriage from their parents. The parents modeled marriage. The Gemara even tells us that Rabbi Chia was very explicit in guiding his daughters about intimacy in very graphic details the Gemara gives us. Rav Kahana went into the bedroom of his own Rav to learn. So it was modeled by rabbis, but almost very much so by parents and by models that people saw at home. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, that has often not the case with a lot of people. They haven't modeled it at home because they come from maybe families that are less religious, or sometimes we become so concerned, and parents are not always the best teachers and best models of healthy intimacy. And so a lot of people are seeking...
In many cases, from my experience, many parents are just afraid to raise the subject.
Right.
Because it's hard to balance the kind of smears expectations, which are often coming from schools and from institutions. We don't speak about this, and then they're kind of standoffish. They don't know exactly what they can say, what they can't say, so they just don't say anything.
Sure, very, very much so. And I think that there's the whole question of intimacy has changed in society at large, then that's become, as you correctly say, very, very a more acute problem. And so a lot of times, if we don't speak about anything, there's two possibilities. If we don't speak about anything, it doesn't exist, or it exists, but it's something that we just don't speak about because we don't know, as you said, how to deal with it. And both of those are untrue because we know that intimacy is a very important part of our lives. Most of us wouldn't be here with it not for intimacy. And we are...
Probably all of us, it's fair to say.
Well, some people are conceived by fertility treatment, so that maybe would be somewhat less different. So let's cut out those people, but definitely the large majority of people wouldn't be here. And we do have things to serve in the Torah and Chazal and later Poskim and Ad Yameinu Anu until today. There are approaches to intimacy which are extremely, extremely important, and so. It is very. I just heard recently a story of a Rosh Yeshiva who said that when he was a child, his father sat down with him and learned one of the sugyot dealing with intimacy, and explained to him in very graphic details what happens, how babies come from, and his father said, "You should hear it. I prefer you hear it from me than you hear it from outside, from your friends or from the TV or whatever it is." And so the younger age we have, the better it is to be able to convey a healthy message about intimacy. It is something intimate. The word intimacy in itself, which is a code word that we use for sexuality, but we'll use the word intimacy because it's new, it's very important. But the word intimacy itself means either the innermost, it's a Latin word, intimus, it's something the innermost, and intimatus, which is also possibly related to intimacy, is something that I invest in order to get the product that I want. And so intimacy also requires effort, it requires preparation, it requires having the correct approach. And in the non-Jewish world and in the world around us, secular world, the intimacy is what I get from it. How do I get pleasure? How do I receive pleasure? And the myth of Eliyahu Dessler writes that ahava comes from the word hav, which means to give, and that in order to create love, we have to give it, and then we will receive it, and that it's something that we don't come to, what can I get out of it, but how can I give pleasure? And if you look at the Gemara, even the Gemara Chovah Ona, which is the obligation that a man should pleasure his wife, is an obligation to give, not just to receive. And by giving, I, of course, also receive pleasure. And that's a very different image than the one in which usually is conveyed, is that this is something that I get pleasure from, and then it becomes very selfish, it becomes very self-centered. And the Torah and Chazal are very selfless, they're very not self-centered, but other people-centered. And to how can I give, how can I pleasure my wife, how can she be happy? In intimacy and everything that comes around intimacy, and that is the obligation. That's the mitzvah ona that a man has. That he wrote in his ketubah, he signed on it that he has a chovah of ona. Ona is to make her happy. The simachet ishto shelakach, that he should make his wife happy. Not that he should be happy, but he should make his wife happy. We hope that when his wife is happy, he will also be happy. But that's not the essence. The essence is to give pleasure. And that's, I think, just that sentence in itself, just what Dessler says in that letter, is in itself of a whole world that is very different than what we're used to hearing from the secular world. And today, of course, we have an issue which for many generations was ignored in the secular world, which is women's desire. The desire of women Chazal was always spoken about, that a man is obligated for his wife, when she has a desire. That was something that was ignored completely and in regular secular sex therapy, there wasn't the idea of a woman having a sexual desire was degraded 100 years ago, or even less. And that today, of course, since we are maybe, and that's a tikkun in the whole world, is that we see that that women also can have a very powerful desire for intimacy and a very powerful desire for relationships, and to respect that is also something of our generation that maybe was less spoken about before. And so, as you said, it's developing that what is the place of intimacy, and the fact that we can speak about it, because you and I are speaking about it now. There are conferences about it. There are books, numerous books that have been written about it. Numerous, as you said, Darsha Balpez, which have been now written down. The Sniper's letter is written down. It's with the integral part of intimacy has become something that's much more spoken about, and maybe because at some point the poskim and the rabbanim saw that there was a lack of that knowledge, and there was a desire to people to learn, and yet people didn't know because they didn't have this parental training that we spoke about. And so it is a need to speak about it. You spoke about Bali Tshuva. Bali Tshuva is a whole different issue in itself. I think a lot of Bali Tshuva, I would say, I would take 3 types of Bali Tshuva. There's Bali Tshuva became Bali Tshuva very, very young. So they're basically almost, by the time they become to an age of maturity, they can be almost like anybody else. They don't have any difference. There's Bali Tshuva who became from afterwards. They already maybe were active, intimate, sexually active before they became from, and then they become from. And there are other types. There's a third category of Bali Tshuva, is a couple that came to be from together, that they did not have the laws of Tarat Mishpacha before, and they weren't. That their intimacy was very, very different, and then they become from, and then their whole approach to intimacy has to be readdressed. And I think that with Bali Tshuva, a lot of times we find that there is a mistaken idea that as though intimacy is something that belongs to that old world, that world that I lived in before, and I've left that. I don't want to be part of that, and it's very important. They have no parental role models, and they're embarrassed to ask Rabbanim because that seems to be something that's connected to that old, long lost world that we've rejected, that we've now created Baruch Hashem Kedusha. And so they need a lot of guidance as to speaking about the importance of intimacy. And often their questions are very specific because they may have been active before and experienced things before that gave them pleasure, that they gave pleasure, and then those things change or maybe are now halachically problematic. And they need a lot of guidance. It's very specific, case-by-case guidance as to what is appropriate. And the whole approach that intimacy is we become the Ramban letter, or the letter that's attributed to the Ramban, speaks about us emulating a Kadosh Baruch Hu, which is really...
Even the way people understand marriage today, whereas once marriage was much more related to a certain hierarchy, related to having, I wouldn't say compliance, maybe that's a strong word, but today the equality and egalitarian nature of marriage is much more emphasized. And I'm just wondering, how that plays out, I'm sure that has a strong relevance also to the field that we're discussing.
Sure.
The kind of different model of marriage, which, whether we like it or not, pervades it, it comes in, it enters, and it affects the way that we perceive our own marriages.
Sure. I mean, I think we go back to marriages, which is, as you say, a related discussion, but is probably a discussion that we could speak about for a long time. But the most important thing in marriage that I think we're missing is not just compliance, and not just that hierarchy, and it's commitment. It's coming into a marriage with a commitment, knowing that we are committed to each other, and we see the increased rates of divorce, and the whole attitude of marriages is a temporary thing, lacks commitment. And to be able to speak about commitment, and to be able to, if you come and you have a long, healthy marriage, and with its ups and downs, like any marriage has, with its arguments and with its shalom bayit issues, like every marriage has. The Rabbanim through to the most simple person also have their challenges in marriage. But to be able to come to convey that they have a healthy marriage and to model that, for our children, to model that for our Talmidim, to model that for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's a very important thing. That's a very powerful message. That in the end of the day, we are committed, and unfortunately, we're not all committed. I'll tell you a story. Just that's an illustrated. A person called me up and he said he wants to speak about contraception. I said, why? He said, because we got married. It was very recent, maybe a couple of months ago, but we're getting divorced. So I said, well, if you're getting divorced, then you don't need contraception, because if you really hate this person so much you're going to get divorced, then what are you talking about intimacy for? He said, well, I have human needs, And I said, no, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. So what are you saying is that this person's okay to be intimate with, or have a physical relationship with, but they're not good enough to have a real deep spiritual relationship with. That's a terrible message, and that the Torah and any normal human being would say that marriage of itself is talking about our commitment, that the relationship, the symbiosis, and the relationship between a physical and a spiritual relationship, and and when I teach Chatanim, it's the same. The whole idea of Tarat Mishpacha, even though it's not what the Torah gave it for, the Torah gave it for, that's a Kadosh Baruch Hu's world, but at least an idea that I can fathom from my own limited human intelligence, is that we have this wonderful balance between a physical and a spiritual relationship. That there are times of the month where we are invested very heavily in the physical relationship, and there are times of the month in which we've invested as heavily and as intimately in a spiritual relationship, and that balance is essential. That's something that's eternal. That goes back to, hopefully, to Avraham Avinu. That commitment, that understanding that is the essence of relationship, and the physical intimacy is the pinnacle of that. It doesn't replace that.
Right. It's the union itself is a reflection of the fidelity and the loyalty, because if you don't have that, then the entire union is flawed. That's one of the Gemara's examples of whether it's thinking about other people or, having something else that clouds or that damages, that flaws that relationship, so that the intimacy itself becomes deeply flawed.
Right. Okay.
Rabbi Weinstein, I very much appreciate your being here with us. Thank you very, very much indeed. And I'm sure it's been illuminating for us and for listeners. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you as usual. Be well. Kol tov yishakach.
Thank you again. Be well and kol tov. And final guest for today's session. And we're going to move from perhaps a focus on Halacha, at least to some degree, to a focus more on the hashkafic elements of intimacy today and the Jewish approach to intimacy in general. And for this we're privileged really to have Rabbi Friedman on the show. Rabbi Friedman is a Chabad chassid, a shaliach, a rabbi, an author, a social philosopher, a public speaker. He was one of the founders of the Beis Chana Institute of Jewish Studies for Girls, a leading institute of Jewish Studies for Chabad, where he still heads the institution. And he's also the author of numerous books, specifically on the subject of intimacy in the Jewish tradition. He authored a very popular book called Doesn't Anyone Blush Anymore? Reclaiming Modesty, Intimacy, and Sexuality. And recently, The Joy of Intimacy, A Soulful Guide to Love, Sexuality, and Marriage. So it's really a pleasure to have somebody as familiar and expert on the topic as Rabbi Friedman. Thank you very much for being with us. And perhaps I'll just start with a general question. We've discussed, or we've raised already in the other interviews, the question of our exposure as people living in the modern world, whether it's from the workplace, whether it's from advertising billboards, whether it's from online, or whether it's just from the general atmosphere, the kind of non-Jewish, secular, Western approach to intimacy and to relationships, and how this often pervades and filters through into our own society. And obviously the emphasis there is very much on romantic association, on love and romance. And the question that I wanted to set was, how would you contrast the Jewish approach to marriage and to intimacy specifically with the kind of approach that's so prevalent today in the culture outside of, and like I said, it filters in to modern society, to our own modern society? Are they radically different? And in which way? We know in Judaism there are many different sources that highlight different elements. So how would you really paint that picture of the Jewish approach versus the kind of approach that we're, perhaps unfortunately, but that we're all too familiar with from the culture in which we live?
Very good question. Because we seem to have a dichotomy. We can't make up our mind. Is intimacy the most unholy thing in our lives? Or is it the holiest thing in our lives? Of course, it has to be the holiest, because that's how you create a Jewish child. So the problem is that so much of our information and our impressions concerning intimacy come from secular sources. Because, as you said, we don't talk about it. It's a taboo subject. So where do people go for information? They get it from secular, non-Jewish sources. So that's why when doing marriage counseling, all these years, something new came up, which was frightening. And that is that happily married couples, successfully married couples, if you speak to them privately, to the husband or to the wife, they will tell you that there are times when they feel completely alone in the world. And it's a terrible feeling. And for that to happen when you're married and happily married, that shows that there is something fundamental missing in our marriages. Because the Torah says, "V'hoyu lebasar echad." The immediate effect of that is that you're never alone in the world. So if people are still feeling alone inside of marriage, what's missing here?
How can they be, just to understand, how can they be on the one hand happily married and on the other hand feeling alone? Isn't that a deep misunderstanding of what it means to be married?
Yes, it is. Yes, absolutely. Because the secular model of what a successful marriage is not the same as what Torah thinks of marriage.
Okay, and how would you express how the Torah sees marriage?
So the Torah sees marriage as a true union or reunion of two people who were meant for each other from Sheshis and Mebreshis. And they become really one person because what they're looking for is another person in their lives. Whereas in the secular world, unfortunately, people are not looking for another person. They're looking for certain services, for certain benefits, for certain advantages. They don't really connect to each other, but they connect to things that they share. Like the Mishnah says, Ava hatluya b'davar. And that's not working very well.
And then how would that approach, though, of understanding the oneness, the unique union that the Torah presents, how does that reflect on our approach to actual intimacy? Meaning, we have the Hollywood image of what it means to be in a romantic relationship. Is our image of that radically different?
I would hope so. I would hope
in which sense? How does that come to bear?
Okay, so first of all, there is the sense of tznius, the sense of holiness, the sense of purpose. See, here's a good a dilemma that needs to be solved. You have the average yeshiva bacher who was told all his life that he shouldn't be thinking about such things, that it's a big yetzer hara.
It's yetzer hara. It's negative. Feeling of guilt. It's all right. It's all negative, and suddenly it becomes Kadosh. How do you resolve that?
Exactly. And it doesn't get resolved because the attitude that it is a disgusting thing, it's an animalistic thing, but when you're married, you can do animal things. That's horrible. So, the things that we are told are sinful and ugly and animalistic, that will never change. That is true. If you're looking for something from another person, physical, you want to get something from that person, then you're abusing the person. Like the Gemara says, not to marry your daughter off Tamoritz, because it's like throwing her to a lion.
Okay, the Doris, I read, right.
So what exactly is the definition of intimacy? Intimacy means a connection between two people to the exclusion of all things. And that's why the Gemara says that there are 9 circumstances in which you should not be intimate.
Right. When the connection is flawed, then the intimacy itself is flawed.
Right. And what makes the flaw? You got distracted by something about each other, not each other. And the relationship itself means the person himself. It's a funny way of putting it, but if you asked your grandmother, so imagine a husband says, I love everything about my wife. Sounds good. But I ask him, you love everything about her. Do you love her? Do you need her in your life? He says, I love everything about her. Everything about her is missing the point. Her. Do you need her in your life? So we go out, we date, we meet, and we check out all the things about each other. But then once you marry, you're not marrying any of those things, you're marrying the person, which means you want another person in your life. That's not happening. People complain that they're uncomfortable having the spouse in their life. They want the benefits. They want the things that come with it. But...
Right. Meaning, you think that people, because their expectations are based on mainly an exposure to secular culture and secular sources, then their whole expectation from the relationship is somehow skewed, is somehow off the mark, and the only way to fix that is by actually opening this up, by giving them this preparation before they get married.
Yes. Look, if a person,
but can you expose unmarried people to these issues with, while doing it in a tsanua way? How do you balance between the exposure on the one hand and the need for the kedusha and the tznius on the other?
It's a very I think it's an age-old challenge. How do you create tznius and kedusha without becoming untznius? But consider this. A person says, I am keeping Torah and mitzvahs because I want to go to Gan Eden. I want to have a chelik in Gan Eden. If you analyze that just even a little bit, if a person says, I am keeping mitzvahs in order to get to Gan Eden, isn't he in fact saying, loud and clear, if I could get to Gan Eden without the mitzvahs, that would be even better.
Right, that's called Almanas Lekabel Pras.
Yes, so Almanas Lekabel Pras actually means if only I could get the Pras without the Avodah.
Right.
So it's almost like saying if I could get to Gan Eden without the Eibishter, I wouldn't need him.
Right. Meaning, irrespective of like the Eibishter, you're saying the Eibishter as a marshal of a spousal relationship, like the Mishnah says, Yom Chosanasai. So also in the same sense is the intimacy with one's spouse.
Exactly. So what's wrong with saying, I want to marry you for your money? There's nothing wrong with money. It's quite useful. What's wrong with it is if I say I'm marrying you for your money, I'm saying what I really want is the money. Do you have to come along with it? If you have to, okay, so I'll marry you. But really, if I could have the money without you...
Meaning, for you, Olam Haba is a representation of being together with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and the mitzvahs are a representation of that end, or not even of that end, but of that actual union, togetherness, relationship.
Yes, you want the Eibishter in your life.
Right.
If you get the Gan Eden, you don't get the Gan Eden.
Right.
So
sorry, go ahead.
Let's use a painful example. A man gets married. He's a healthy man. He's a strong man. But he gets into an accident, chas v'sholem, and he's paralyzed, completely paralyzed. And he remains in that condition for 10 years, and then he passes away. When he passes away, his wife is sitting shiva, she's grieving, she's crying, she's carrying on. Imagine asking the wife, was weinst du? For the last 10 years, he wasn't good for anything. What did he do to you? What do you get from him? She would say, of course, I had him, now I don't have him. What was I getting from him? That's beside the point.
Right.
It's not what you get. So nothing you get from your husband can be more important than your husband. So what does it mean to become one with him? It means put aside all things. Put aside all character traits. Put aside all milas, chesrenes. Put it all aside. This person belongs in your life or not? That's marriage.
Right. Marriage as a union rather than as a contract, as some people would, even in the frum world, I would say some people look at marriage somehow as a contract, and what you're saying is that is actually not just wrong in how to define marriage, but it's also deeply disturbing on the level of intimacy, because it puts it in the wrong framework, as it were.
Yes, and another shocking thing is that the real culprit here is love. People are bombarded, brainwashed with the message of love. Two people love each other, they get married. Love is also a thing. So if a man says to a woman, I'll marry you for your money, everybody says, no, that's not. And if a person says, I marry you for love, why is that better? I'm marrying you because I want love. I don't really want you. I just want the love that I get from you. So, of course, betela davar, betela ava. So we fell out of love, we're getting divorced. Love is a kagetchke. It's the idol of America. It literally is, because if you believe that God is love, and that's why you believe in God and worship God, then in fact you are worshiping love, not Him.
Right, but again, I mein, on the other hand, there is the positive love that the Torah, of course, endorses. Ma'im rabim lo yuchlu lechaves es ha'ahava. Love is certainly something we also endorse in the deepest way. So how would you define the love that the Torah does see as being an integral part of the relationship?
it's like a mother loves her child not because she wants love, but because it's her child. The love is the byproduct, not the purpose. The purpose is to have your child. And when you have your child, of course you love her. So imagine a mother saying to her children, if you don't love me, that's okay. There are other children in the world. The neighbor's children love me, so fine. It's ridiculous. No mother wants love from her children. She wants her child's love. The Eibishter doesn't want love from whoever will give it. He wants our Ahava. Why? Because we are B'nai B'chei Yisrael.
Right, particular love. But that particular love, sometimes takes time till it develops within a spousal relationship.
Yes, but that has to be the original goal. The original goal should be, I want you to be mine. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you're mine, I'm going to love you.
Right. It's the love between us that is part of the union between us.
Yeah. So first you have to say Shema Yisrael, listen and understand Hashem Elokeinu. Then v'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. But you don't start with the Ahava. Mm-hmm. So you don't need love. You don't need love from your wife. And in fact, if you need love, you shouldn't be getting married at all. You go back to mommy. Mommy will give you love. You don't need love when you're an adult and you're ready to get married. You need another person in your life, because just being yourself is not acceptable.
Right, but that other person isn't just it's not just a companion or a friend. It's somebody with whom you are building a relationship of love.
Yes, and the objective is to become one, which I think is expressed in the idea that after we're married, I can't identify myself. I can't visualize myself without the spouse.
Right.
I'm not me without her.
Right.
It's funny that our grandparents had very good marriages. And we use it as a model. They got married, it was for keeps, it was real. And most people say, yeah, they were pretty miserable. They fought all the time. Who says they were so happy? So look at the difference between them and us. They had each other. They were married to each other. There were no things. So they had each other and they became one. The things about each other they didn't like, and they complained till 120. But get divorced and not have you? Unthinkable. In today's world, it's the exact opposite.
It's the opposite. But this is part of the... Sorry, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I love everything about my wife.
Right.
I just don't need her. I don't know why I put up with her. But all the things that I'm getting from her is wonderful.
Right, but for many people today, though, the kind of marriages of our grandparents were based on a kind of hierarchy. A patriarchal marriage. The man as the big boss and so on. And while today the kind of understanding, and I think this is filtered through or seeped in even to the from the yeshivish community, is much more of a marriage based on an equality, a togetherness, rather than a hierarchy. Does that itself, in your eye, changed the whole perception of how we relate to one another, and of course represented also in the intimacy that's expressed. Meaning, is that development also, is there something positive in that development too?
That is a complex issue, because in the process of becoming more equal, we've lost our individuality, where the man doesn't really know what it means to be a husband, and the woman doesn't really know what it means to be a wife. So they share chores, they share errands. This is not good for the marriage. The husband has to be the male, the mashpia, and the woman must be the mekabel. You can't change nature. A man is satisfied, fulfilled when he feels like he is giving his wife a good life. And a wife feels like a mensch. She feels fulfilled when she knows that she is accepted and received her husband into her life completely. You have to have a mashpia and a mekabel. If you have two mashpiyim, they're just going to fight all the time. And if you have two mekabelim, they're just going to sit there, look at each other, and nothing's going to happen.
If you reverse it, but I'm sure that you find, even with the most Feuerman and yeshivish families, that this is kind of lost on this insight is not something that many live by today.
I know, and you can see the harm that's doing. So for those people who are thinking of getting married and they're dating or whatever it's called, here's an important thing. When a woman is sitting with a man thinking about a shidduch, what feeling, what regesh of the heart is an indication that this could be a good marriage? And if that regesh is missing, it's not a good sign. What we call good chemistry. Good chemistry means like this. The man is sitting and looking at this woman, and for whatever reason, he feels, I would like to take care of her for the rest of her life. That's how she makes me feel. And she should be feeling, I would follow this man anywhere for the rest of my life, because that's how he makes me feel. So good chemistry doesn't mean I'm excited about you. That doesn't prove anything. Good chemistry means that the man makes the woman comfortable being female, and she makes him comfortable being male. Usually, we make each other uncomfortable. A little tension, a little pressure to make a good impression. But the good chemistry means I'm so comfortable being what I am with this person. That's what we need to be looking for. And if there's a problem in marriage, the husband and the wife have to take a good look. Is he the mashpia? Is he taking charge? Is he feeling responsible? Is he there to take care of her? Or is he making demands of her because he wants to be mekabel? And she has to take a look.
I once said at the Sheva Brachas, the Gemara says, Ish ve'isha zachu shchinem b'neim lo zachu eish echlosam. But the Gemara doesn't say what does it mean zachu. How do you have that? But the Gemara says one thing: ish ve'isha. If he is an ish, as an ish needs to be, and if she is an isha, as the feminine as the isha needs to be. So that perhaps is b'derech remez. But you see, I think intuitively many people will identify with what you say. But on the other hand, because everything that we're bombarded with, from the kind of cartoon, figures that we have in early youth, all the way through, to adolescence and adulthood, unless these issues are actually brought in by parents, brought in by Moshe, brought in somehow, then, young adults who are approaching Shidduchim, this isn't what they're coming in with. These are not the kind of insights and concepts that they're bringing in when they're looking for. How do you bring this in? Do you try to do this on an institutional level, on a family level? How do we do this?
It has to be part of the fabric of life. Like the Torah says that when Adam and Chava were expelled from Gan Eden, she was cursed with El Ishech Chukosech. The Medrash says, look at how the Eibishter's curses always turn into blessings. It's a curse because she is going to be needy. Right? She's going to be dependent on him. She is going to be desperate to find a husband. So the Medrash says, but look what happened. When men discovered that women yearn for a husband, every man is running around looking for a wife. Which means that the woman's hunger, the tshuka that a woman has for her husband, not for something, is irresistible to a man. In other words, when she is really a mekabel, that's irresistible to a mashpia. Like when a student comes into a classroom and really wants to know, wants to learn, the teacher becomes a great teacher all of a sudden. He finds new cases because the Talmud inspires the Rav. The Talmida Yesa Mikulam. The woman has all the power to inspire her husband to be a mashpia. But in order for her to be a mekabel, she has to be very vulnerable. She has to surrender herself completely to him. And she can't do that if she's not secure. If she's not absolutely secure in his loyalty, then she can't afford to be so vulnerable. So she'll hold back a little bit, which means that she's not mekabel at all. Because if you hold back even a little bit, you stop being mekabel. You're cautious. You're testing him. You're waiting to see. You're not really mekabel. And women have to understand, being mekabel is the same thing as being nurturing. How does a woman nurture her family? Not by hard work. In fact, she doesn't have to do anything. If she creates a welcoming, accepting, receiving atmosphere, being in the house is nurturing, even if she doesn't do anything. A mother nurtures a baby simply by embracing the baby, not by spoon feeding. So being a mekabel also means being a nurturer, giving life without having to lift a finger. That's very powerful. And without that, the man doesn't see what he needs to give.
And you would say that that's also a feminine instinct, meaning that should be inbuilt insofar as we haven't, ruined it by education or by lack thereof. That should be something that comes naturally and instinctively to a young woman.
Yes. So I think that part of the objection to a woman being teveya b'peh, if a woman has to demand intimacy, so it's a lack of tznius, whatever, but it also shows that there's something fundamentally wrong. She shouldn't have to be teveya. If she has to demand that something is wrong in the dynamic between husband and wife, the mashpia, the mekabel, it's not working. So a woman should never have to ask or demand. Her acceptance of him should be inspiring to him. If a Talmud asks a sincere question, how can the Vav not be inspired by that?
Right. And so tell me if I'm putting this in the right way, or if this is how you would say it. I know that many make the distinction between the Christian outlook or the Catholic outlook, whereby intimacy itself is considered somehow sinful, somehow negative. What you would say is that from the Jewish perspective, insofar as it brings in these elements of the right way, the holy way, the appropriate way, in which husband and wife are united, then that itself elevates, as it were, brings kedusha to that union itself, and that is the epitome of the Jewish kedusha, the Jewish home.
Well, the definition of the word kedusha means set aside, kodesh or muvdol. If a person can remove from himself all attraction and all interest in things, we live in a very materialistic society. Very hard to put aside all the things. But anyone who could do that, if you could put aside all things and just connect with another human being, that is Kodesh. It doesn't need to be embellished or improved. There's nothing wrong with it in the first place. The machshava zara that a bacha should never have is because it's not intimate. It's just a thing. And this thing is not Kodesh. But the person you're married to and the ability to connect to that person is not a thing. It was never treif. It was never low and unholy. In fact, it is the only thing that two human beings can do that brings the Shekhinah without actually doing a mitzvah.
Right. It's as it were in the relationship itself. It's kadosh in that the relationship is set aside for one another, and nothing else.
You see, but most people think it's set aside for one another and no one else.
Right.
That's like
which is also that's what Tzitzis in Kedushim, Mekudeshes, and so on, Meyuchedes, meaning that is also a part of it. The loyalty, the fidelity.
Yes, but that's like not having an avodah zarah.
Right.
No Elohim achedim. Okay, of course, there's no one else. But for the marriage to really be intimate, there must be no thing. Certainly not someone else. But even within the relationship, nothing about your wife should be more important than her.
Right.
You put a mezuzah on the door. It's the word zu and zeh. And the men...
that's the home, the putting the two together.
Yeah. And the men is even more beautiful. Like the difference between heilech and mehalech. Heilech means it's a job. I got to go. I'm working at it. I'm doing something. Mehalech means walking for pleasure. So when you put the men in front of a verb, it makes it, I don't know what the exact grammatical term is, but the mem in front of a word makes it casual, natural, pleasant. So mezuzah, when the he and the
just
she,
being together without the instrumental part, just the actual being together. Like Chazal say, Matayel b'yachad b'Gan Eden.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't think this is too idealistic or too himmeldik. I think it's our true nature, and we've just gotten verblunget.
Well, it just requires providing an alternative to the kind of reading and viewing that most people are exposed to, I guess.
Yeah.
Which itself is quite a challenge today. But I'm happy that there's somebody who's taking up the challenge, and I just hope that the kind of material will also make its way, to the firm and the deeply committed community that sometimes thinks, well, we don't need this because with us everything is okay. But the fact is that this exposure, it really pervades into everywhere, and there's nowhere that hasn't really been deeply affected by the kind of modern trends and understanding about marriage, love, and intimacy.
Yeah. One final beautiful verse.
Yes.
Ata b'chartonu mikol ha'amin. It's such an amazing statement because the Eibishter is perfect in all ways, which means obviously that he doesn't need anything. So if you don't need anything, you're perfect. And yet, Ata b'chartonu mikol ha'amin. Obviously, the Eibishter didn't pick us or choose us for something, because he doesn't need anything. He chose us, to have someone, not something. So Ata b'chartanu means not you gave us the job of Torah and mitzvahs. There's no job. You chose us to be your people. Now here's the beautiful thing. If I don't need anything from you, I don't need, either because I'm not looking for things or because I have everything. I don't need anything from you. All I want is for you to be mine, to be in my life. And for some reason, you're not available to me. What am I missing? Am I imperfect because I don't have you? I'm completely perfect because I don't need anything. The fact that I need you and you're not available means that you're missing. I'm not missing anything. You're missing in my life. I miss you. And that's what the Eibishter says, Ata b'chartonu. I need you in my life. Just for you. So what are the Torah and the mitzvahs? Torah and mitzvahs means I'm in his life. If I'm not doing Torah and mitzvahs, I'm not in his life. And if I'm not in his...
And the converse is also true. And he is, of course, also in
not in
our
my
life.
life.
That's right.
Right. But if we don't, chas v'sholom, if we're not doing Torah and mitzvahs, he needs us just as much, if not more. Because now we're missing. And that's what a marriage should be. I don't need anything from you. But if you're not in my life, you're missing in my life. See, there's nothing selfish about it. It's not I'm missing something. You're missing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the Alter Rebbe said in the middle of davening, Nili b'shamayim ve'im choloi chafatzti ba'oretz. Ich will nicht Gan Eden, ich will nur dir allein.
Rabbi Manish, thank you very, very much for your time. This has been really, instrumental would be the wrong word after this conversation, but it's been really enlightening, and much appreciate the time and the talk.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I hope we've helped some people and made life a little richer.
Thank you very much. Calls for all the best.
And this is the answers to last week's Halacha Riddle.
As far as the riddles of the week. So as far as the Shaila, why ladies don't wear yarmulke, so I think the pshat is because the ladies are born with an inborn Yerushalayim, like the Gemara says, Ketogla Avtocha Shenemel Anoshim, Neisem Anashim, and
men, on the other hand, they have to work harder to get to Yerushalayim. That's their task. They have to learn Torah and do things to promote it more. As far as the Shaila about the second Shaila about the Mon, how were they able to bench if it was Nivla and the Vorim and so they already had the equal. So it's clear that the sheer equal is equivalent to the amount of time that a person is still benefiting as far as not being hungry from the food that he has eaten. He doesn't feel any need to eat because it's still keeping him full. After the sheer equal, a person has room to he's ready to eat some more. That's why, if it's a small meal, it's 72 minutes, because a person could eat more. If it's a big meal, then it's going to be a lot longer than 72 minutes. So it's the sheer how much a person, how much it benefited the person as far as not being hungry anymore. Being that the Mon, even though it's nil in the Vorim, as far as that benefit of not being hungry, so he still has that, and therefore he'll still be able to make a bracha thanking Hashem for giving him that benefit. He's still within that time frame of feeling the benefit.